All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the November meeting of our FxD program. Let's go ahead and just dive right in. Um, Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Susan Magsamen to our FxD community as a guest speaker. I'm super excited about this one. I'm going to be introducing Susan in a few minutes in more detail, but first I want to kick off the meeting and share some quick announcements just to make sure that we can really focus on her talk and Q&A right up until the end of the hour after we're able to get through some of these announcements. So just bear with me in the meantime. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which I now live, work, and research, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay respect to their elders, lores, customs, and creation spirits, and I recognize that these lands were never ceded. So as many of you know, we recently went through an exercise to brainstorm and concretize our FxD mission, vision, and values, building on our work in Miro, our October workshops, and our asynchronous follow-up thereafter. You can follow the process from top to bottom in our Miro board that's pictured on the right of the slide. But as of this past week, we have finalized these and shared them on LinkedIn, tweaking slightly to allow for captured feedback. So they're really just meant to serve as guidelines for the group. I appreciate everybody helping out, especially Amy and Laura, who are on the call right now. Really appreciate everything that everybody did. So please familiarize yourselves with these going forward, and we'll, of course, revisit these in the future as needed. FxD is going to be taking a break next month for the holidays, but we're going to plan to reconvene in January to start with a fresh batch of speakers and to brainstorm initiatives for the upcoming year. So here are just some of the ideas that we have for January through March. I'm still working on some speakers for January and March on those subject areas, but for February, we do have 3 of our FxD members who are committed to talking more about the science behind workplace well-being design. And that's Rian, Chris, and Marcella. So really excited to have them. Some of these activities that we're going to be working on in the coming year are going to include things like book and podcast clubs, which some people have expressed interest in, as well as an edited book that we're proposing for early to mid next year that's going to be on flourishing workplaces. I'm going to be sharing a call for book chapters in the coming year for that and would love to hear more ideas on how you all think that we can collaborate in the coming year. If you're interested in heading up any of these initiatives, convening a book club, collaborating on papers or presentations, or know of some pro bono projects that might need doing, please reach out to me or just openly reach out to the group via LinkedIn or Miro. I'd also love to have some more leadership help in the new year, so let me know if you'd like to take a more active role going forward. We do have about 160 people now as part of the group, so really excited to have some of the new membership as well. I'm going to put some polls on LinkedIn in the coming month too to gauge people's interest in getting more involved with presenting and really just a variety of things. So keep an eye on that. And also feel free to share some of that expression of interest within the Miro board that we still have at the top of our Miro board with some of that information if you want to, perhaps drop information in with books of interest, papers of interest, projects that you think are really worth highlighting, and also to identify collaboration ideas. So please continue to use LinkedIn and Miro in the future, staying engaged over the holidays. Okay, so today's speaker is Susan Magsamen, one of the co-authors of Your Brain on Art. I have it as kind of a lovely neuroaesthetics Bible that I keep near me. We will get into that in more detail, but as some of you may remember from our kickoff meeting in August, this group had a variety of influencers before we began, and the book played a really crucial role in our conception. It not only highlighted how we as humans are ultra-social creatures who biologically evolved to belong to something greater than ourselves, as quoted from the book, but it also introduced Maria Rosario Jackson's proposed term of cultural kitchens, which I really love. Quote, places capable of restoring, replenishing, and reinvigorating our full creative selves and communities to help us reckon with situations and imagine futures with authentic participation. So we're really, as you all know, a collective, a community of practitioners and researchers who want to do and experience more, bridging the divide of groups and disciplines to get good work done. So really it's with this in mind that we see our FxD community as a virtual cultural kitchen of sorts. So with that in mind, we welcome Susan Magsamen to our FxD community as a guest speaker. Susan is the founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab, IAM Lab, Center for Applied Neuroaesthetics, a groundbreaking neuroaesthetics initiative at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Johns Hopkins is my alma mater, so always love to see people like this represented by Johns Hopkins. Susan's work focuses on how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change the brain, body, and behavior, and how this knowledge can be translated to inform health, well-being, and learning programs in medicine, public health, and education. She's also the author of Impact Thinking, an interdisciplinary translational research model to enhance human potential through the use of arts and aesthetics. This model is a generative framework that applies a new scientific method to arts and aesthetics research and, at the same time, considers how the research can be scaled, disseminated, and evaluated for impact. In addition to her role at the IAM Lab, she is the co-director of the NeuroArts Blueprint Project in partnership with the Aspen Institute. The Blueprint aims to create the field of neuroarts where the arts and aesthetics are mainstream in medicine and public health. She's also the co-author, as we know, of the New York Times bestseller, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, written for the general public. Susan's going to begin with a approximately 15-minute presentation. We come and go on that time, followed by Q&A up until the end of the hour. And we're going to be using Zoom Q&A or raised hands, which you can access at the bottom of your Zoom window. So if you want to start getting in the queue early, I imagine we'll have a few questions. So please feel free to use those in the meantime. We're so happy to have you with us today, Susan. The floor is yours. I'm going to stop sharing and spotlight you so you can get going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's really a huge pleasure for me to be here. And just so you know, I'm not by myself. I'm here with my buddy, Ryder, who is, if you can see him, he's on the bed.
Lovely.
He's my enriched environment. So he may move around, but I wanted to introduce you to him. In preparing for this conversation, I really have been so excited, and I have way more slides than I have time for. So I'm going to kind of barrel through a little bit, but what I really want to do is just give you a bit of information about where my head is at these days and kind of what I've been doubling down on and really thinking a lot more about as it relates to flourishing and what it means to live a truly creative life and to share that. And I've thought of Jenna a lot as a neuro arts bridge builder, and I think that this group really represents that. So I'm just going to jump in, and I'm going to stop myself by 3:30 latest, even if I'm not finished the slides, just because I really want us to have a deeper conversation. But I'll kind of maybe just give you a little bit of some insights. Let me see if I can get this. Okay, so this says, let's see who can share, and I think I'm the host, so I should be able to share.
Yes, right, hopefully it should be good.
Just shout out if you don't mind. Just let me know that you can see my slides, because I won't have a lot of optics on that. Can you guys see them?
Yes, that's perfect. Okay. It's sharing perfectly.
Okay, great. All right, so let me just move in. So you heard a little bit about the lab. Our lab was built in around 2007, and it was created because we had a donor who really believed that the arts could save us, and she continues to be a major donor, she and her family. And it's really a privilege to have had the opportunity to work with them. But our mission is very broad, to amplify human potential through the arts and aesthetic experiences. Let's see if this, whoops. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. So we work in 4 areas. I'm not going to go into detail, but just to level set, we work in research, primarily translational research, although we do some primary work, field building, which is the NeuroArts Blueprint, also this impact thinking model. And we are doing a lot of work now in intentional design and intentional spaces, and looking at a roadmap on how to really coalesce design, environment, climate, even to really think about, we're in a space all the time, whether that's in our heads, virtually, or physically in all the different places that we move. And so we really think that this area offers a huge opportunity. And I know a lot of you are working in this space. Then we do a lot of community building, and we also just started our first upper level neuroscience course at Johns Hopkins, and we're looking at developing a degree granting program in neuroaesthetics, as well as building out some additional professional development through the lens of neuroarts. So you know about the book. What I wanted to say about the book is that, Ivy and I had no idea that this book would have the kind of impact that it has had. And I think it has had this kind of resounding yes, because the book mirrors what we already knew. It looks at ourselves, and I think it says, I intuitively knew that the arts changed me, but I forgot. We've forgotten as a culture, we've forgotten as a society, on an individual level, and we don't see it showing up in medicine or public health or in our day-to-day lives as it once did. And yet we've been missing something. And so I think the book has validated us. I think it gives us language and gives us a different kind of information than we might have had before. And we pay for what we value, and we have not valued the arts. Therefore, we don't pay for them. We don't weave them into all the different ways in which we might. Whoops, let's see. You guys can still see the screen, right? There we go. So I talk about this a lot, that we're standing on the verge of a cultural shift and where the arts can deliver potent, accessible, and proven health and well-being solutions. And I think we're not on a verge anymore. I think we have moved into that space where it is now a movement. The movement is accelerating, and we're really moving towards building a very complex generative field. And just a level set, when I talk about the arts, I talk about all the different art forms, all the ones that you can imagine, but the definition for Ivy and I is creative expression. What do we do that we express ourselves, whether that's dancing, singing, whether that's doodling, cooking, virtual reality, all those things. And I think that they're uniquely individual. And I think more different ways to express ourselves are coming. They're coming culturally, they're coming across the lifespan, but they're also being accelerated by the need for us to share our voices in so many different ways. This is a really interesting chart we did a couple years ago that I think of as a virtual pantry of the kinds of ingredients. If this was a periodic table, how could you put these together to make recipes for different kinds of needs? And I think as bridge builders, you're already doing that, but you can see, maybe it's bringing people together through food and performing arts and some kind of visual arts for loneliness and isolation. So what is that four-dimensional modeling that helps to use these experiences, understanding the neurophysiology and the needs that are really critically important? And this is not new. We've known that the arts were critical for developing humanity. If any of you listen to the podcast, The Emerald, I put it on your podcast list. It's really extraordinary, where it's weaving together modern society and mythology and storytelling and science. And this whole idea around humans moved forward and evolved because of fire, because of the ability to cook meat, and to be able to come around a fire, to change literally the physiology of our bodies, to make our stomachs not have to do so much work so that our brains could really grow. And, we are pretty extraordinary creatures in that way. This is an image that I love. It dates back to 225,000 years old, and it was found in Tibet by an archaeologist named David Zhang. And what he really, I think, sees here is that we've been using our hands since the beginning of time, and they show up everywhere. They show up in any cave drawings or old pictographs. This idea of how we use our hands and how we build things and make things is so uniquely human. But the only way that we really can do that is through our sensory systems. And I have become obsessed with understanding how we bring the world in and how that changes us neurophysiologically, psychologically, functionally, and structurally. And I think the more we're understanding that, the more that gets applied to that sort of periodic chart of art activities that we know are some of the most salient things that happen to us. So, saliency is what the brain decides to focus on, what we decide to focus on as human beings. And I just love that these very powerful, potent sensorial experiences that are creative expressions are the things that change our health, change our well-being, change our quality of life, and are the ways of being, not doing, but being, that really amplify our lives in such important and meaningful ways. So you heard the definition of neuroaesthetics, which is the study of how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change our brains, bodies, and behavior, and how that knowledge gets translated into practices. So we're really interested in that translation in physical health and mental health, in public health, in neuroarchitecture, and in design, and how communities come together. And I think, it's easy to see that this work has application in virtually every area of our lives. And so what does that really look like? This starts to really get at, this is an illustration by Greg Dunn, who's just a fabulous illustrator and a neuroscientist. And I think what he's really showing here in such a beautiful way is the intersections of our stomach, the way neurotransmitters are created, the intersection of the somatosensory cortex. If you look at this sort of blue in here, and also the kind of orange, the default mode network and the saliency network all sort of operate to help us make meaning, make sense of the world when we are at rest. And how do we really sort of think about that? And what are those inputs that allow that to happen? And I love thinking about the cerebellum and the brainstem, because it's so primal. So, art, and especially sound and olfactory smell are two of the most salient sensory experiences that work immediately. So, sound enters your body within 3 milliseconds, which is pretty extraordinary. And olfactory and scent, 75% of your most salient memories come from smell. And so, we just have this amazing ability to be able to build these altered states of mood, joy, elation, flourishing, this idea of how we think about thriving through this ability to create these environments that are so salient, but salient in a pro-social growth way. Neuroaesthetics is highly interdisciplinary, and I won't spend a lot of time on this other than to say the arts are critically important, the sciences are important. Technology is really a driver, because the one thing technology has done is allow us to get inside our brains to really understand what is happening neurophysiologically as one kind of way of knowing. Neuroarts is the field. And the field is made up of all these different sectors and different types of research, different kinds of arts practitioners, as well as policymakers and funders, artists, and as I always say, art enders, anybody that's interested in arts and it's vast. And so this work with the NeuroArts Blueprint is really working to build out that coalesce and build out that field so we really can make it sustainable. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A. But I want to talk a little bit about ways of knowing. So this is not all about basic science. I think basic science has come to the party and is catching up with artists. Artists have always known the power of the arts to heal, to help us thrive, to help us grow. But this model that we've been working with on ways of knowing is becoming increasingly important. I think about it as solution science, because when you bring people with lived experience, when you have the artistic representation in any form you have indigenous and ancestral knowledge, and you bring in this academic scholarship around experiments and theories and hypotheses that often show up in multiple disciplines, but speak to a scientific method. You start to understand very intractable problems like poverty, like depression, like neurodegeneration, and the role that the arts and aesthetic experiences can have on those. And, the medical model is not working. Healthcare, as we know it, is not the answer to human flourishing. It is this weaving of our core physiological neurobiology that we're wired for. That is really what has been it's like if you took out a major vitamin and you said you're not going to get vitamin C. I feel like that's what's happened with the arts. We've taken something out and we're not well. And medicine is not the answer. Medicine is certainly an important thing, but the medical model of fixing disease, what we're trying to think about more is sidewalk solutions. How do you think about this work from early childhood, from really conception all the way through to end of life care? And in many ways, that's what Your Brain on Art tried to show, was that kind of continuum. But when we're looking at different arts and aesthetic experiences, whatever they're solving for, I don't want us to ever forget that I think of neuroarts and neuroaesthetics as precision medicine. It is going to be as unique as we are individually. So this is a model that Anjan Chatterjee put together it's called the neuroaesthetic triad. And it really just shows these 3 concentric circles that meet in the middle to offer your unique aesthetic experience. And they include where you come from and what your sensory motor. We all have different perceptions. And that come from where we come from, but also physiological and sensorial perceptions. I have a really acute sense of smell. My eyes are not so good. I don't hear as well. We each have our own sort of unique physiological perceptions. And then what matters to us? What's important to us? What emotions are elicited? And they are not the same. So, I always love the work that Samir Zeki did, thinking about beauty. And, for probably forever, but for centuries, the term beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It is true. While the same part of the brain lights up, what we each see as beautiful is different because we're different. And I think that's a underscored diversity model that's really important to honor differences, even when we think we're seeing things in the same way. I alluded to this earlier, but this work is showing up in every sector and it has huge implications. And I think hopefully one of the things that we can talk about is some of these flourishing by design related to applications, including, where it's showing up in different sectors. And so we talked a little bit about this, but because the arts really alter a complex physiological network of interconnected systems, there's an opportunity to think about what solutions and what art forms can really be engaged to address things like all of the different health systems issues or public health issues or educational systems. And I thought I'd walk through, that is all true. But Ivy Ross and I did this experiment a couple years ago in Milan, at the Milan Salone, that looked at biometrics and how people really understand their own bodies. And this is a quote by Jill Bolte Taylor that I think exemplifies this, which, while we know it's true that this physiology is so important, still, and this is where I think we have a great opportunity to turn the tide, most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, but we're actually feeling creatures that think. And so we put together something called a space for being. And I love the term being. I just think we very rarely are just being. But in this experiment, we created a band that collected biometrics, and we designed 3 rooms based on neuroaesthetic principles. Each was to elicit a different kind of sensorial experience. One was calm, one was sort of very bright using LED. And the third was kind of more ethereal. And when you walked in, you could smell charcoal. So it had this like ancient, old, very high ceilings. And we took the bands and we analyzed them. And what we found was that uh, there were 3 rooms, and you can see how the bursts of color. The second room in this case was the room that was most activating, but for this person. But what we asked was, what room did you feel most at ease in? So you can see that was the third room. For this person, it was very calming. But what we found was when we asked people, what room do you feel most at ease in? Over 60% got it wrong. They did not know how they felt. They thought they understood, but they didn't know what their bodies were saying. And I think what's important about that is we have a long way to go to get people back in their bodies and back into understanding what really moves them. And when you know that, you make different decisions. And so, the color of the year might be, I don't know what it is this year, purple. But that doesn't mean that that's the color that everybody should be painting their walls, right? So getting back to that recipe of what's important and why it's important. Just a couple of other thoughts. I think one of the questions that I have in this conversation is how can we engage neuroarts and the different ways of knowing to design transformational spaces with the goal of expanding human flourishing? And, you know, flourishing is not a thing. We think of it as a muscle. And so it's a combination of things that come together. And when you practice the combination of these things, these behavioral patterns, you start to support flourishing moving forward. And so in the book, we talk about several different combinations that create the state of being a flourishing. And that includes curiosity and wonder, awe, enriched environments, and that can be both virtual and in person. And of course, nature is certainly so hugely important there. Creativity, ritual, and ritual in its most broadest sense, and novelty and surprise. And so how do those show up in the work that you're doing to elicit that kind of flourishing mindset? And I always think it's interesting. The WHO talks about what is well-being, and they don't talk about the absence of disease. They talk more about this idea of we don't want to just survive, we want to thrive, we want to flourish. So how do we raise the bar on what well-being really means? It isn't just, being able to go to work and to take care of your family. Those are really important, to take care of yourself. But how do we go beyond that? How do we amplify potential? And so been really interested in that my whole life. And then I'm just going to go through a couple slides and call it. But these are just some examples of some spaces that have done that have really taken these flourishing concepts. And this one is really important to me. This is a farm of 6 acres in a burnt out area in Chicago. It's called Sweetwater Foundation. And they built this barn where they have dances, where they have Friday night community dinners, where they're growing all their own food in this neighborhood that doesn't even have a grocery store. And it's a really great example of how you can use this mindset to really be able to create something that the community needs. And I just love it as an example. This is an image, it's not a little buzzy, but looking at the way that we're using art of nature for dementia patients. This is a program from the Maggie Center. It's a cancer center that's using nature to help people process the news that they've been diagnosed with cancer. And then they use this after treatments with their family to really ground themselves and try to feel normal in a disease that really takes so much of your spirit. So they're flourishing in this space. This is the interior of that space. Looking at renewal, technology is playing a huge role here, where in this case, this is a place called Chromosonics, where you're actually hearing color and seeing sound, and it's showing up everywhere. These kinds of renewal spaces that give you 15 minutes of this total radical presence that changes the way your brain and body function. This is an example of social connection using space for movement. And I think movement is also super, super important. Another is creative spaces. We're seeing a lot of this show up in military, in prisons, in first responder spaces where they're not in post-traumatic stress, they are in constant chronic stress, and seeing the way that different art experiences in these creative spaces, in these hives, are really helping. And finally, this is an example of something that the NeuroArts Blueprint is doing, where we are using communities to build sustainable connections to help use arts and aesthetic experiences to really address some of the most difficult issues in communities. So each community is different, each solution is different, but it's a super exciting space to be working in. So let me stop there, and I'm really looking forward to talking through. I think I've turned the screen off. Is that right?
You have, yes,
Okay,
perfect.
great, great.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. That was excellent. You hit so many fantastic topics. Like I love the ways of knowing, ways of being, etc. So that's really fantastic. I'm going to see if I can try to add spotlights so hopefully we can see each other more easily.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great.
Okay, good. And I'm sorry, my dog, who's kind of the FxD mascot, is not joining us today. He's normally in the background, but he's a little too reactive today, so that's not happening.
That would probably be very reactive here.
Yeah, we don't need that distraction. But yeah, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and open the floor for questions. We have Q&A up if anybody wants to use that, or you can just raise your hands. Amy. Okay.
Thank you, Susan. That was just so heart expanding, and I really experienced that validation that you mentioned at the start of feeling something that we need without necessarily knowing it or having the words for it. So I really thank you for that presentation. I really appreciate that. I had a question about precision medicine and how I come from a field of biological psychology mostly, where we talk about precision medicine. And one of the major criticisms is that it is not public health compatible because it's, by its very nature, very tailored and individualized and expensive. How, and I see a lot of your work is community-based and, you know, is really grounded in minorities that need it and, you know, working with groups at a time. So how do you reconcile those being precise and tailoring it to the individual, but also being able to do this at scale? Yeah.
That's a great question. I think we have to really understand what precision means. And so I'll give you a couple examples. We've been doing work with communities who are really experiencing tremendous climate disasters. And so we can go in with art materials and start to work with kids. And I'm talking about, you know, paper and markers. And the prompts are, you know, draw a place where you would like to be. What gets drawn is going to be different for each person, right? So it's honoring, it's not saying, it's trying to honor self-expression and agency and advocacy. Oftentimes we go into places where there might not be people that feel like they can draw, but they can sing. And so helping to understand what are those art forms that people respond to at a very high level. And then when you're looking at different types of, I'll give you another example. We've been working with a group of gangs where, you think, well, how could you, be more directed with that? We decided to do a weaving project where we had different gang members from different gangs work at the ends of a loom, and they had to work together. So they created a very different thing. But then what they did in the middle was have to collaborate on how to finish that piece of art. And so you're always going to have different responses based on, another example is music. Some people are going to be with Parkinson's. Some people are going to respond to tango more than they're going to respond to the waltz. It's finding the right music for that. But in a group setting, you can do that. And there's also something about sharing. You probably all do work with visual teaching strategies, or you know that methodology, where you're asking people to share their different perspectives. So working within groups actually, I think, oftentimes, and in a public health setting, often is more beneficial for bringing that precision, that individual voice forward.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, great.
Do you know visual teaching strategies? Have you guys used that at all in your work?
I have a bit. I'm not sure of other
Okay.
people, but I think, perhaps even just terminology may be a semantic, but I think so.
Yeah.
All right, Nushin, I think you're next. Let me add a spotlight and have at it.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. Great to see you here after the Intentional Spaces Summit. Lovely presentation. My question is, have you considered or thought about or explored wisdom traditions and their unique approaches and perspective into the being, and you mentioned, and art? I know you talked about indigenous, but I'm wondering if, so I recently came back from Bhutan and I've been exploring Persian architecture. So I'm wondering if looking at wisdom traditions, looking back at those, especially in architecture, the buildings that have been lasting for such a long time, can we learn from that, from sacred architecture, from transcendental architecture? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a great question. And Julio Bermudez has done some work in trying to understand sacred spaces. He was funded at the Templeton Foundation. Our lab has not done work in that space, but I think it's really important work. In our lab, we're about ready to start a larger research initiative looking at spaces. And that's one of the spaces that we're excited to try to understand a little bit more. I think sacred geometry has been something that has existed for a long time. And I think there's real validity to that work, but really trying to understand it in a generative way, but in a more rigorous approach to be able to hopefully to be able to duplicate or replicate, or at least understand the universal principles around that, I think are really important. I had a call earlier today. It was with the Luce Foundation. I don't know if you know them. And they fund two things. They fund religion and theology, and they're interested in religion. They're interested in spaces and ritual. And they're also fund indigenous cultures. And we were talking about there is a really important ethical, I think there's a lot of ethical issues around the space in general, because, in general, the colonial nature of taking over ideas or taking from cultures. And I think what we haven't yet figured out well is how to learn from cultures without in a reciprocal way. And that's not even quite the right word, but in a respectful way where we are really not extracting. We do a little bit of work in psychedelics, set and setting, the conditions for psychedelics or for other mood altering experiences. And there's a big appetite to go in and try to replicate kivas and spaces that are sacred spaces. And I just don't, I don't think they translate. And B, I think that there's something fundamentally, there's a repatriation there that I think we haven't really understood. But I think you're right. The power of these spaces, if we could figure out co-creating how to look at them, would be really meaningful. And Ivy Ross, if she would hear, she would say, we have to go back in order to go forward. And I think that's true. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely sentiment. I'm glad that we got into that because, as I mentioned before, in January or hopefully soon thereafter, we're planning to have some speakers from an Indigenous philosophy perspective. So really love that that's even part of the ways of knowing. Yes.
Yeah, it's really important. And it's been so that was it just devalued. So I think it's super important to have a thoughtful approach about that.
Exactly. All
On
right.
that,
There you are. Erin, are you there?
yeah, but I was also, so I have a completely different separate thing, but just like an hour ago, this fabulous woman that focuses on sharing Indigenous wisdom that I met through a Foundation for Social Connection event, she posted her new book that's coming up. And it is like, the title is about flourishing. Like it's like 100% your target, what we're talking about here. So I put a link in there to the LinkedIn post. I don't think the book
Oh, great.
I is published yet, but it will be soon.
She's at Berkeley, right? I'm seeing this. She's at Berkeley,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know her, but this is great. I
She's
think
so cool. We sat next to each other in like a session where, you know, you have like dinner table conversation, and she was just fabulous.
oh, I love that.
Yeah. Okay. So I was gonna ask, I focus on social connection, and I was thinking about just so many different aspects, but literally earlier today we did an event where we're ideating around this topic and thinking about the difference between like co-viewing art versus co-creating art, et cetera, and kind of thinking like, so for instance, while we create spaces that healthcare or otherwise, where you're sort of like, it's hard to say, okay, everybody get your pens and paper out or get your materials out. And I'm curious if you've seen like wonderful examples, or if you have thoughts of like how to create something, you know, in the temporariness that is transient spaces, but also where, like, for instance, a waiting room where you're waiting for a long time and, you know, multiple different generations might be engaged in something like that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of it, and it really works. Georgetown University, Julia Landry is her name, and she runs the creative arts program, and it's not only creative arts therapists, it's the creative arts across the whole university, the whole campus. And in their waiting room, when you come into the waiting room, there's, first of all, amazing art. There's almost always a local musician who is scheduled and plays. And they do what they think of as seasonal activities. So when I was there, we made Valentine's cards. You know, and I think the community, they meet the community at the level. So it's not like, you know, oh, we're going to make something esoteric, or, you know, but they always have kind of a make and take. And it's really extraordinary, really, really extraordinary. And it helps the people that are waiting. They often, they actually integrate it into patients' rooms. They use scent, and these little single scent puffs, so that they don't, you know,
Yeah.
create scent in a room. But it's really, really effective, and it's having the invitation to do it, that seems to just be like someone who's just like doing it, sitting there doing it. I've seen quilts be made that way, like paper quilts, where there's a group project that's being put together, where it's like you just do a little bit, and the idea is, you know, many hands makes light work, and they have art exhibits. Walter Reed has done with their inpatient group, they've had more formalized activities where they do group making around a prompt. So, and I think it's creating that nest. There's also a group, they call them the hives, where I'm seeing them show up in colleges where youth are crocheting, they're knitting, they're, you know, but it's destigmatizing, and it's very, you know, it's just part of the culture. And it's usually in those cases, it's usually youth that are generating it, that are, you know, kind of getting them going, setting them up. So those are just some of the things that I've seen most recently. But I think it's really important when you create that environment, people come. Notre Dame College here has Thursdays. Every Thursday, and from 3 to 5. And then on Saturdays, 10 to 12, the whole community is invited. Meaning people that live all over town are invited to come and make art. And it's always a different art activity. So people that don't know each other come together. And I think that's also really cool. And the farmers markets are doing it too. So think about how, it's not just like I want my kid to have time while I shop. It's a way to know each other. Both make
Yes.
and also experiencing something.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Sure.
Yeah, great question. I love that. And that's something that, especially I'm very familiar with Georgetown, Susan, just from having had a parent who went through a lot of cancer treatment there. I'm very familiar with also the art and the quality of the art, and then experiencing different healthcare in different locations, like South Korea, just having different humidifiers, and as well as the smells and the puff of air, like you said, that all-inclusive experience is just so important. All right, Yoko, I'm going to you next. All right, you ready?
Yes, I am. So first of all, thank you, Susan, for this very, very inspiring talk. My question is that I'm particularly interested to your comment and research on a space for being research. And you mentioned something like that the people just don't know well enough, I guess, to back to your body. They don't know what they are sensing. They don't know what they're feeling. And my question is, have you seen any differences, diversity among people or the group of people? What kind of people have more capacity to go back to their body? Some others are not. And I am thinking about the question because I do the research of like a Japanese space and how that makes people feel, especially the mindfulness. And I noticed that some of like a visual or sensual cues could be universal, but some of them are the thing that you need to learn over the years. Therefore, I thought that there may be a differences in the capacity to go back to the body depending on the environment that you've grown up or are used to.
I think it's a really great question. And I think we have to really take into account culture and child development. And, we see, if you look at early childhood development literature, and that's sort of where I started my career, was looking at child development. Children naturally have these impulses, right? They're probably to the detriment of the parents, but they want to get into stuff. They want to touch and feel. If you look at curiosity of, babies and young children, it's really it's really becomes subject dependent on what's allowed in the culture and what isn't allowed. I'm reading a really, really great book right now called Impossible Creatures by Catherine Rundell. And it's one of the things in an interview, she talks about how she was raised where her parents didn't know where she was. She was running around, she was exploring, she was not getting into trouble, but we don't, in Western culture, our kids don't have those opportunities. They're very narrowly focused, and they're told what they believe, not feel what they know. And I think other cultures have different approaches to that. And so I don't know. I don't think that there's been a study that's really looked at the capacity for that kind of sensorial connection. I think that we should be teaching sensorial literacy. I think we don't teach it. We don't, we feel first, then we create an emotion, then we think. That's physiology. That's the Damasio's work that really look at how do we process sensorial information. But when you think about shock or trauma and how that immediately shuts down your central nervous system, your inability to speak, I think we are experiencing what environment's doing to us, but we don't understand it. And we may also see it as a disease as disruption and not something that our body should be doing, right? Like when you're afraid, you do stop. That you should, that's what your body is supposed to do. And I think we've turned some of these natural physiologies into, we've pathologized them. So, there are things that I think we can look at in that way too. But I don't know of any studies that have looked at culture specifically, but generally child development and cultures that children grow up where there is more capacity for wonder. Tolerance for ambiguity is also really important, so that you don't know the answer, but you feel your way to that. And I'll also say you have agency to be able to express what you're feeling and then interpret that and try to understand it. And that can happen in any culture, but some cultures I think probably have more inherent values around that.
Thank
But
you
it's
very
really
much,
important. I think it's a
Susan.
really important question, and it ties to education, and it ties to, public health, I also think, in a really big way. And because we don't teach any of this, we come to it later, or we know we need it and we find it, but we aren't, by third grade is usually when kids start to know, oh, if I'm not good at something, I shouldn't be doing an art because I'm not going to get any value of it. So we actually start to cut down creative expression, and we stigmatize it and shame it. So it's, in some ways, it's like a double hit, right? We may not be fostering it, but if it's been rarefied, you're encouraged not to do it. So, and that's also, I think, really dangerous.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yoko. Right, looks like Alexiana has a question, so let me go ahead and spotlight you next. Keep jumping around. Oh, we'll just go ahead, Alexiana, because you're not sharing your screen. Yeah.
No, yeah, sorry, I think my internet would collapse if I did.
Yeah.
Thank
No
you
worries.
so much, Susan. I feel like it's going to take me a while to process everything you've spoken about, which is really great. Just a quick question, because I'm just an early career designer and I'm just in the process. I do interior design, but I'm also studying neuroscience just to try to get my head around all of this. Because I did personally experience like design and how it helped me get through a lot of trauma, grief, and I was trying to understand that. And I guess as an early career designer, I'm realizing the more that I research, the bigger the problem feels. And I just like, if you had any advice on like where to start. Yeah.
So, well, thank you for sharing that. And I know what you mean about how spaces can be so healing, and that you created those spaces. There are a couple of programs that I've seen that are more, I'm not even sure if they're certificates, but workshops that are working with interior designers. And let me see if I can find, while we're on, let me see if I can find the name of the one that I'm thinking about. There's a woman named, I think I'm going to get this right. Kafka is her, Linda Kafka. She's a Greenleaf certified interior designer who, I'm going to put this in the chat. This is her LinkedIn. I think, oh wait, let me see if I can do that. I think she's really been really great at understanding the interior, how to bring this work to interior designers in a reputable way, not overstating the science, or oh, there you're somebody so fast.
I did it for you. It's all good.
Okay. Thank you. You just saw my skills as a technologist right there. Anyway, I know she's doing some different workshops, and I think they're online. But you could also talk to her. She's very accessible. She's in Canada, And I think she's really great. She calls it neurodesign, and it looks like, not 100% sure, but yeah, I mean, and there's, some of the work of Anjan Chatterjee is really great. Suchi Reddy is a designer, an architect, interior person who's done some great work. But I think that universe of folks are really the right group to try. Oh, there's a new book coming out by, hold on. Oh, where are you? Milton Scheinberg. He's an architect. He worked with Julio Bermudez, and he has a really great book coming out thinking about architecture and neuroscience and design, not just architecture, design and neuroscience. And I think it's going to be really beautiful. I think it's a really good, like, oh, I get it. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, the moving boundaries work is really great too. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet. Yikes, it's 4 o'clock.
It is,
I
or
knew
8
this would
a.m.
happen.
here. It's all right. It actually was perfect. I felt like we were going to be like fighting people off with a stick, but no, we had a really great, very rich conversation. And thank you so much, Susan, for putting things in the framework of even flourishing. Like we talked a lot about this beforehand, and I really appreciate your perspectives, sharing that with everybody here today. But yeah, appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure, and see you again.
Yeah, sounds lovely.
Take care. Bye-bye.